once I'm done with my piece. Okay. We're all in. Okay. Welcome to Blood, Sweat, and Queers.
Yeah.
Vampiric love stories. Yes, give it up. For those of you at home. My name is Greg Newton. I'm the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, along with my partner Donnie Jokum, who will be back shortly. Donnie and I founded the Bureau in 2012. It's an independent, all-volunteer queer bookstore. Today we're being helped by Evan Burgess, who's one of our Saturday volunteers. Yes, give it up for the volunteers. Like many queer things, we do this for love, not money. But we will ask for your money because we do need it to keep this thing going. So sadly, the center has started charging us rent in July, which has given us another burden, unfortunately. So what we're really asking folks to do, of course, buy books, make a donation, all of that helps. But we would love it if you would sign up to become a monthly donor so that we have a regular amount of money that we can count on. So I'm gonna pass around a bag for cash donations, Venmo donations, any kind of donations. But there's also a QR code for our tax-deductible monthly donation that you can sign up for. Obviously, I don't want you to sit and fill this out right now, but you can also just check it out on our website, which is bgsqd.com. But any way you're able to support us, whether it's donations, buying books, or just smiling and being a kind person, we appreciate it. So I'm going to pass that around. Those of you online, if you'd like to give through Venmo, you can do that at BGSQD. Or as I mentioned, if you want to sign up to become a monthly donor, you can do that on our website, bgsqd.com, and click on donate. The Bureau has regular bookstore hours Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And we often stay open later when we have events. And we have a lot of events here at the Bureau. We keep a busy calendar. So if you're not already on our email list and you'd like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room or on the aforementioned website, bgsqd.com. Many of the events are book related, but we also do all kinds of events. We always have changing art exhibitions. Right now, you are surrounded by the Homo Cats. The exhibition title is Fight the Power, 15 Years of Homo Cats. So it's a Brooklyn-based artist, Jay Morrison, who we've known for about 13 years, and we're really happy to have his work up surrounding us. Let's see, the only other thing from me, I wanted to give a land acknowledgement before we get started, and then I'll pass it over to Jamie from Contrarian Publishing. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community House's Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. The Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a fundamental part of our collective queer liberation. And we have a free zine, which we hope you will take, read, and spread around the world, that speaks to why we feel it is especially important for queer people to speak out in solidarity with Palestinians, and especially at this moment. So please do take one of these free zines on your way out. And that is it for me, so I'm gonna hand it over to Jamie Rue from Contrarian Publishing, and we're gonna get into some vampiric love stories. Please give it up for Jamie.
And celebrating the launch of Blood, Sweat, and Queers with us. I would like to start by saying that we will be joined by another author shortly. They're just running a tad bit late, so they're just gonna mosey on in here at some point. So my name is Jamie Rue. I'm the founder of Contrarian Publishing. I am also one of the editors of Blood, Sweat, and Queers, which is what we're here to talk about. This here is the lovely May Murray, and she is one of the contributing authors to Blood, Sweat, and Queers. And over there is Margaret Hall, and she is the other editor of Blood, Sweat, and Queers. Rather than taking up a little bit too much of your time rambling, which is what I do, I'd love to pass the torch a little bit to Margaret, because she can tell you a little bit more about vampires and queerness and the intersection between them and why we started this anthology.
Absolutely. So while I primarily work in the theater space, I'm also a vampire scholar. And there is kind of only one constant throughout modern vampire literature, and it is that the vampire always represents taboo sexuality, almost always queer sexuality in a literal sense. The three foundational novels of English language vampiric literature consist of Carmilla, which is explicitly sapphic, The Vampire by John Polidori, which is deeply gay, and Dracula, which is just a pansexual smorgasbord. These are pieces that have influenced us deeply and heavily, but this is also a tradition that tends to be overlooked by the mainstream. People talk about vampires as being sexy, but not about what that sex actually means. Vampires are inherently queer characters in the communal sense of the word. They exist outside of the norm. They exist outside of the binary, and as they have existed in literature, in media, in all basically fiction for the last 70 years, they represent a desire for community, intimacy, and deep, deep yearning. You can't find a vampire novel where they are not reaching for something in humanity that they do not have immediate access to. Whether it be Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, which is basically two gay men raising a children, or you're reaching more toward the True Blood series, which is much more of a pansexual approach. Even Twilight, which I would argue Edward Cullen is a butch lesbian. But I stand by it. Read Midnight Sun, the text is there. The vampire has always represented those on the outskirts of society. Those that is not considered the automatic protected norm. And Jamie and I first bonded over a mutual love of vampire fiction. And when we were feeling sort of bereft and lost, as a lot of us felt in January, we decided to put that terror we were feeling towards something for the community. And that is how this anthology was born.
I would like to give Margaret significantly more credit than she is giving herself right now for that, because what actually happened was I approached Margaret saying, you know, there's something in me that wants to do this kind of vampire anthology, and Margaret immediately went, hang on, vampires are gay. And we live in a bad, bad time. So what if we did it this way? And I immediately went, that is the greatest idea anyone's ever had, ever. And it's started a completely different direction for Contrarian Publishing as a whole, actually, because we're gonna keep doing charity anthologies. Not all of them will be gay, unfortunately. However, they will all be centered on, you know, thinking about marginalized identities and responding to the political landscape that we're in and that we continue to fight in. So she started a whole thing for us, so I think she needs some recognition for that.
It's all born out of one of my core beliefs, which is that fiction and storytelling is powerful. And the ability to communicate the inner life of a person, a creature, an eldritch horror is, and we'll get into her story, Blood and Oil, shortly.
They have no context for that in eldritch horror.
Sorry. Read the book, it'll make sense. But the ability to empathize is something that you have to have if you read fiction. It's one of the reasons why podcast bros are so obsessed with nonfiction self-help books, is because it doesn't make them identify with another human being. Fiction makes you reach across the line and understand life from a different character or a different person's perspective. And I think that is an incredibly powerful tool of activism, in addition to fundraising, in addition to going out and protesting. Getting in someone's mind and helping them look at the world a different way can be incredibly revolutionary. And I'm so proud of the work we've done here with Contrarian and the work that will be coming in the future from Contrarian. This is just the start of the journey. But the 8 authors that we've assembled for this, to start this, are just so special to me.
Absolutely, and perfect segue into Andy Astron has also joined us, and they are another one of the contributing authors in Blood, Sweat, and Queers. Andy and May came to us in very different ways, and we are incredibly thankful that we got to work with both of them and with every single person that is a part of the anthology. But let's start with, the journey started more with May, so let's start there, and Margaret was a little bit more involved in that side of the things, so.
I have been a fan of Mae Murray's work for a while. May is an incredible voice in the horror space, and specifically in the horror space from the perspective of marginalized womanhood. And we had really bonded talking over the power of vampire stories to talk about transgressive sexuality. And I think within 2 weeks of us talking about this being a project, I'm like, hey, so we're taking open submissions for most of these. Can we please ask Mae Murray?
It was the first day. I'm pretty sure you said that immediately.
Probably. And I'm incredibly grateful that May said yes, because the story she has produced, Blood and Oil, I read so much vampire fiction, you guys. Like, I read a lot of it, and I have never read a story like Blood and Oil.
Yeah.
It stretches what the vampire archetype represents in the English language. It pulls from some really incredible traditions. And May, if you'd like to introduce the story to the people.
All right. First of all, let me be totally real. All of my brain power is going to not slipping off the stool because I got these like polyester pants on. So give me a second. I'm gonna stand for a second. Blood and Oil, the idea came about because I wanted to, well, okay, did everybody see Sinners? Okay. I love that movie. I'm from Arkansas, 4 counties above where Sinners takes place. And a lot of the internet were going on and on about the Choctaw vampire hunters. They didn't get a lot of screen time. And that's kind of where the idea of Blood and Oil was born, where I wanted to create as a person of mixed heritage, I wanted to create an indigenous vampire story that was wholly indigenous, something completely different from our colonial idea of what a vampire is, but also making that vampire in its queerness more natural than the colonial idea of what a human being is. So it takes place primarily at an oil refinery with a working class mixed heritage woman who witnesses, I guess, an eldritch horror. Killing
That's the context.
Yeah, killing one of her coworkers, and then what happens after she witnesses that, how she is blamed for that death, and how the connection between her and the vampire leads to her own liberation. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your story.
Okay.
So when Margaret first approached you with the anthology, what was your kind of immediate reaction? Because when you're approached about a project, you don't already have that in your brain. It's not something that's necessarily already percolating. So how did that feel to you? How did you land here?
So it was extremely fortuitous because I was writing this as a novel anyway. So I was developing the novel, like writing my outline when Margaret approached me. And I think in our initial meeting, I said, I think I would like to write a short story as kind of like training wheels to see if this has potential for a novel. So I was extremely excited. Obviously, I also love vampires, and that's how Maggie and I met also, is through watching Interview with the Vampire. Listen, don't get me started.
We'll be here all day.
Yeah, but yeah, so I was extremely excited. I took it as an opportunity to see, you know, if I could really write an original vampire story.
Amazing. How did it feel for you to like imbue this eldritch horror, I guess, as we keep referring to it? How did it feel for you to reimagine the vampire in this way? Like, how did you go about doing that?
Well, I was scared initially because I thought, for context, the vampire feeds on oil as well as blood, and is the opening scene. The vampire is unearthed through the hole that a oil pump jack makes in the ground. So it comes from oil drilling. And I was scared at first because I was like, is this enough of a vampire to be able to call it a vampire? But then, you know, as I was speaking with, I have a writing workshop that meets every Sunday, and I was talking to them about it, and one of my friends brought up, well, oil is just essentially, it's blood and bones, and it's decomposition, essentially. And so that's when I started to think of it in terms of an eco-horror story that is not only about queerness, but it's about like how we treat ourselves, how we treat the earth, and I try to imbue it with a lot of indigenous thought.
Lovely, thank you. Margaret, do you have questions for Meg?
I'm
Sure.
gonna go like this, so that you guys don't need to share a mic. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll throw you one.
Okay.
So, I know you also read a lot of vampire fiction. Were there any sort of authors or trains of thought that influenced you while you were working on this piece?
I always have Anne Rice in mind, because I think that she, as I was developing the idea for the novel, I want it to be a large world, and I want it to have several books in a series. So I was thinking about what she did with vampires and how she made them different from what people thought of vampires at the time the first book was written in 1976. So I wanted to do that for a contemporary audience, like make us rethink what a vampire is and does, and the kind of scope, because Anne Rice's stories in the Vampire Chronicles, it takes place over thousands of years, and it goes backward and forward in time, and everything kind of ties together. And in that sense of the wanting to create an interconnected story in the way that in indigenous teaching we believe that everyone and everything is interconnected, I really looked to Anne Rice for that. And also I read her very young, and reading The Vampire Lestat when I was like 13 was like one of my queer awakenings. And yeah, I was approaching it from like, I want this to be kind of like punk rock. How can I make it, you know, emulate The Vampire Lestat, but for a contemporary audience? And I was like, we're just gonna make it really gritty. It's gonna be really dirty, and it's gonna be, as I grew up, extremely working class. And we don't see vampires within the context of working class. We see them more as like living in castles and mansions, and usually they're rescuing someone probably who is from the working class, but everyone here is, like the vampire starts lower than my main character who works at the oil refinery. Like the vampire comes from below the earth and is not, doesn't have a real sense of self until it arrives. So just reimagining Anne Rice for working class, indigenous, contemporary audience.
And I mean, speaking of Anne, it's kind of fortuitous the event that we're having today. Today is Anne Rice's birthday.
Wow. All right. Well, I guess next we'll talk about Andy Astra. So we held open submissions for this anthology. So we put out a call and said, hey, if you have a vampire story, we want to see it. And that was because while we did reach out to a few established authors, it was really important to us to hear voices from everywhere, because it's easy to kind of get trapped in a bubble and look only at the things that already exist, right? And so by opening up to an open submissions, we were really looking at a pool, a big range of what people took from the prompt of Blood, Sweat, and Queers. And so Andy's story, Girl in the Grove, was a gem that we found in the open submissions, and it was a big gem because so we had asked for a word count of somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 words, and I believe it was closer to 15.
I think it was 20.
Oh, was it closer to 20 at the time? Yeah, it would have been like 19,000 words when we got it. And so Margaret and I read it, and we were going, okay, love it. It is so long, but like it was captivating. And so we reached out to Andy, and I was like, hey, so love it so much. Would you be open to cutting this down? Because like, you know, we gave everyone else a limitation of this amount, and so we kind of, you know, need to make it work. And very graciously, Andy said yes. And also very fortuitously, so we did blind submissions for this, so when we were reviewing, it was almost completely, we had no clue who had written what. I will say, I did have a little bit more context, but by the time Margaret got them, it was fully, you know, she had no clue. Like, I had blocked out all the names and everything like that. I had, unfortunately, seen some of the names, but I tried not to pay attention too much to them, so it was maybe very mildly biased, if anything.
We kept each other honest.
We tried to do our best. So I did a blind read. I also then went through and made sure that we were, you know, making sure our pool of submissions was diverse and not telling too much of one kind of a story, and then passed on finalists to Margaret. And very fortuitously, it turns out Andy is also an artist, and a very, very talented artist. So you might have seen Spooky Girl art on Instagram or other places, and she's incredible. They're incredible, my apologies. And so they had already created art for this work as well, which kind of sparked a whole journey for us of creating art for all of the stories that are in the anthology, which you can see kind of at the front there while you're browsing later. So, Andy, where did the story come from?
Well, this was so fortuitous for me as well, because of course, when I submitted the 19,000 word story, I knew that that was not what you guys were looking for. But I had totally randomly encountered the ad, you know, and it was because my phone was listening to me, of course,
Yes.
you know, I'm like talking
No,
about.
our phone's fine us.
Yeah, and it had popped
That's
up
just
for
the
me.
world we live in, it's okay.
And I had done this short story, and it's really, I think, maybe only the second short story I've ever finished, because I'm a very new author. I've been writing for a long time, but really not seriously until this last year when I saw Agatha All Along for the first time about a year ago, and I was like, okay, stories like this can happen. And so for whatever reason, that was like the final push that I needed, and I just started working on this book. And I was really putting a lot of pressure on myself. I live out in Hawaii, and so my studio's literally out in the middle of the jungle, and I had like locked myself away, was like neglecting my illustration career and just like pumping out this sapphic witchy novel. And I was putting all this pressure on myself because it was just leaning towards a romance. And I was like, feeling like I wasn't taking myself seriously in that moment, and I was like, I really want this to feel, you know, like literature and like an epic, and I just don't want it to get too romantic, but here I am, you know, I'm months in and I'm just writing this sapphic romance. And so I was feeling myself like kind of go in that direction. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take a break and I want to write a short story. And I had just watched the new Interview with the Vampire series.
We just
So
keep
I was
coming
like,
back to it.
Yeah, we just keep going back
and
to
I've been on a little bit of a kick. I just rewatched, Gary Oldman and Dracula, and I had just been feeling it. So I started that story as kind of this exploration of, I'm not going to put the limitation on myself to not be romantic, to not be kind of campy. I'm just going to go for it because I kind of felt like I wanted to do that anyways. And so I had written this story and it felt really good for me. It felt like, just queer Dracula. Like it felt classic and fun. And literally like a week after I had finished it, this ad comes up and I was like,
I did not know this.
I was like,
That's
no
so
way.
fun.
And so I sit down with my story and I'm like, going through your guys' page and I'm like, this is divine, right? That's insane. But I'm looking at my story and I'm like, now I have to cut it down from 19,000 words. I couldn't. I've never really done anything like this before. I don't have experience really with editing. So I was like, well, after literally sitting at it for a week, for a week, and I think it was like the last day of submissions, I was like, I cannot figure out how to cut this down in a way that makes sense. I was like, I'm just gonna submit it. I was like, and maybe they'll like it enough that they'll contact me and hopefully help me cut it down.
We did.
We did. So it was totally fortunate for me as well, and it's just been such an incredible experience. And you guys have been so gracious with me as we figured that out and worked through that together. But it was really just an incredible experience for me to be able to take this story that I felt almost was like this indulgence of working through some stuff I was encountering in my novel that I'm writing, and again, a first-time author, never really exploring any of this, and taking this story and being able to work through it with you guys in just this really cool setting. And and as I've been reading through the other stories in the anthology all week, it's funny because my story does really feel, it's so classic. It's like a vampire in a castle, and it's cliche in a lot of ways. But I really wanted the love interest to feel really interesting, and a big inspiration for me with my main character Alondra's love interest was, I have to say, The Last Unicorn was a pretty big inspiration. But it was Last Unicorn and then Haku from Spirited Away. That kind of idea of a spirit that can take human form. So I really wanted even though the story itself, I wanted to indulge myself and have it feel kind of classic. And it's not campy, but just really classic. I wanted the love story to feel fresh and interesting.
Yeah. I think you do a wonderful job of melding very, very classic, when you think of a vampire, as May mentioned, you think of a castle, you think probably very opulent, very decadent, very in some ways removed from society, all of those things. You've created that character and then you've put such an interesting spin on it. Especially with the love interest. So I don't think we actually talked about what the story is kind of about. So if you could kind of introduce, don't give too much away.
I know,
but,
I don't want to spoil anything because there is a little bit of not a twist, but a little bit of a reveal in it. But without spoiling too much, my story is definitely kind of a classic gothic vampire themed story. It follows my main character Alondra, who is basically kind of a female Dracula. She's been far removed in her castle with her vampire daughters for years and years. But I think what's really important about her character is she has been alive for a really, really long time. And the setting is kind of at, it doesn't really go into it too much, but it's almost at the turn of the century, let's say, where it's modern technology and stuff is the Industrial Revolution is kind of starting to happen. So she's really feeling the weight of that. She's feeling the weight of her years in terms of she was around when things felt more magical and there was unicorns and fairies and stuff and so she kind of now thousands of years later in her mind kind of idealizes that time. And she is reclusive and all these things that the classic vampire kind of is, but she's also kind of jaded and she's kind of over it. And it's not that she doesn't want to be alive anymore or anything like that. She's just she has reached this point in her life where she's almost nostalgic for the past in a way. And she's kind of it's made her become more reclusive and more removed. And she's kind of locks herself away to look at records. And, she's just disillusioned with how things are in the kind of modern world. So when she meets her love interest, and her love interest is based around this sacred grove that she goes to on her properties. She has this castle with all these lands, and she has started, once a month for the last 200 years on the full moon, goes out to her favorite sacred grove in the woods to, read her book and to kind of just feel like something other than an ancient vampire for a moment. And through that, develops this relationship with her love interest, who is a fairy girl, essentially. And of course, there's this moment where even Alondra herself is kind of like, well, I shouldn't really be around a fairy girl, you know, but she's so nostalgic for this era that she remembers from thousands of years ago, where, you know, fairies used to walk the world. She used to see unicorns and creatures like that she kind of can't help herself, and almost like takes her in as this, like, you know, almost this element of nostalgia, like she wants to protect this version of the past. And that, of course, leads to them kind of developing a relationship, but also like leads to her kind of questioning, not her identity, but what her identity looks like. And I think as I was thinking about this today, like with queerness, I think and so many of these stories are just an exploration of identity and of finding ourselves and where we fit in and where we belong. But with Alondra's identity, a lot of it is like she feels like she knows who she is, and she feels like that's very locked in. And I know for my own queer identity, I've gone through so many labels and shifts of that through my whole life, and I've worked so hard to try and put myself in certain boxes within that. And it's only as I've gotten older that I realized that the real beauty of queer identity is that you actually really don't have to define yourself, and you don't have to put that pressure on yourself. And I think that's what Alondra's love interest really challenges for her, is this aspect of her identity. Like, yeah, you can be a monster vampire, but you can also still have love and community in your life. That doesn't have to be all encompassing. And I think Alondra really struggles with that, and that's kind of her journey, or lack thereof, in that story, is trying to rectify this version of herself that she thought she knew with, you know, what this fairy kind of introduces to her life.
So how did you decide, when you were kind of originally writing this story, how did you decide what elements of classic vampirism to keep and which to move away from?
I don't know if that was a really conscious decision for me. It was kind of intuitive, I guess. I kind of just went with what felt right for me. So in my head, I think I didn't, again, really make that conscious decision. I just wanted it to feel like, I wanted it to feel fresh and interesting. So I think as I was writing the character of Secret, I think that's where those kind of modern, and keeping in mind my inspirations of like Haku from Spirited Away and The Last Unicorn, it was more like I wanted to include what I love about those stories, specifically kind of The Last Unicorn, how it really touches on that kind of like turning of, you know, magic leaving the world, and like what that looks like as, you know, somebody of, you know, marginalized identity trying to cling on to something like and make a new world for themselves. So I think that kind of just came alongside writing Secret. Like Secret kind of brought the elements of like modernness into it. You know, I think it was just me feeling out the characters and figuring out what they would do.
Amazing. Margaret, do you have any questions for Andy?
Fantasy and the vampire genre are very much intertwined, but people tend to kind of separate out supernatural stories from more traditional fantasy. But you very much in this story have a foot in both worlds. Was it a conscious choice for you to blend those, or did it just feel like a natural marriage?
A little bit of both. I think it was a very conscious choice as I was fleshing out Alondra's character and, you know, working through my other book that I'm working on right now, and like fleshing out that world and how I see magic in the world now, you know, like my own beliefs about how all these things coexist. I think that it was a conscious choice, like as Alondra is struggling with, and as I was imagining what it would be like to be a 3,000-year-old vampire, you know, and what she's seen. Like I kind of did want to explore a little bit of like, in a lot of fantasy stories, you know, we deal with like the vampires and the monsters being against like unicorns and fairies, and there's this element of like light versus dark. But I imagine if after a really long time and you're starting to see less and less of like magical kind in the world in general, that would feel like you almost have this kinship with magic and fantasy in this way, even if you were a creature of the night or something that previously didn't identify with those things. So I think it was a conscious choice to kind of bridge that gap as an exploration of Alondra's character and what it would be like to be alive for that long, and then maybe make choices or be in an environment where you wouldn't necessarily would at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it would be great for us to get into some, let's go for everyone in the audience, if you have any questions, let those percolate. Let me go for some fun questions first, and then we'll hand it on over if we have any audience questions. All right, favorite piece of vampire media, go.
That's mean. Right now, honestly, it probably is Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire, the TV version they're currently working on AMC. Both seasons are now on Netflix. Highly recommend watching them. It's incredible. It's queer. It's some of the best television writing I've seen in the last 25 years. I critique theater for a living, and every single one of these episodes is like a Pulitzer-winning play.
I basically have the same answer, but in my defense, I grew up with the books and the movie, and I had my grandmother passed last year, and she and I were very, very close. I was basically raised with her as my mother, and we connected when I was really young, and when I say young, I mean like 10. We watched the movie together, and I grew up fighting with her about whether or not Tom Cruise made a good Lestat, and we really did. This is an argument that went on for literally 2 decades. Because I actually thought that he was quite good, but she hated him. She hated him because she read the books and was a fan of the books since the 70s, and really just pictured Lestat as something else. So, wow, it's kind of an emotional story, but actually I wrote a piece for Fangoria.com called Interview with the Vampire Killed My Grandma, because the day that she died, we were watching the first episode of season 2 together. So she did live to get to see Lestat as she knew him from the books. So we watched the first season together the year before, when she was diagnosed with cancer. And then when she was in the hospital the next year, almost a year to the day, I was like, well, you've got to get out and we've got to go home so you can watch season 2. We're going to watch season 2 together. So the day that she died, we watched season 2, episode 1 together. She fell asleep during the episode and she passed away in her sleep. So Interview with a Vampire, it holds it's more of a special thing in my heart than, it's solidified in there where I feel like I can't even like anything else as much as I like that. Because it's a personal story as well as the writing is just phenomenal, and that's how we met. And this was before my grandmother died. We bonded over talking about. I went to school for screenwriting, and we bonded over talking about the screenwriting.
Okay, so mine is Penny Dreadful, which is not completely vampire. It's like the first season leans a little bit more towards kind of the classic Dracula angle, but that is just one of my favorite shows of all time, just for the way that it deals with classic and contemporary horror and queerness so intentionally. But I really do love the way that vampires in particular are woven into the main character's story and her kind of homoerotic relationship with her best friend Nina, who is taken by the vampire, and she kind of pursues her, and that's this very the kind of the backbone of the main character's kind of tormented relationship with her sense of self and her ex-best friend or best friend. I just love the exploration of, and I'm thinking about this, I do kind of love a cross genre. I do kind of love a mix of fantasy and kind of classic horror in that way. I like things that, and Penny Dreadful does an incredible job of taking all these kind of different genres and classic horror and literary characters and weaving them together in a story that makes a lot of cohesive sense and is really, really deep. But I do have to also give an honorable mention to The Strain by Guillermo del Toro. One of my all-time favorites. The main character sucks super bad, so
Intentionally.
Yeah, I think he's supposed to be hateable. But also, I think another cross-genre classic that really combines fantasy with kind of the classic vampires and even zombies a little bit, because they're almost very zombie-esque. It's very dark, and it takes the vampire trope and genre and really explores it in a way that's, I just think, really different and interesting. And I do definitely gravitate towards things that, are cross-genre, that take something really classic and put kind of a fresh spin on it.
Amazing. I asked that question and then panicked because I realized my answer was going to have to be Twilight. So I was going to have to explain myself.
You have good reasons, though.
Twilight's why I became an editor. So that's it. Just, unfortunately, that's what my answer is. A more recent answer would be Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. My next lightning round question, I'm not going to explain myself any more than that. Okay, so my next question would be, vampires or werewolves?
Vampires is not even a question.
We're all gonna
We're
say
obviously
vampires.
Yeah. Oh, you're not?
Oh, dissenter?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a werewolf so bad. I don't know if you guys remember, I don't know if I'm the oldest one here, but when I was a kid, in the very well, I mean on the panel. When I was a kid, in 2001, 2002, there was a show called Big Wolf on Campus, and I do not know if you guys remember that they aired it on ABC, and I wanted to be a werewolf a la Big Wolf on Campus. It was about a college-age werewolf who, I don't know, they had eyes like the contacts I have in right now, actually. So, okay, this is a long story short. Now I would choose vampires, but there is a deep love for werewolves, and if I had to choose between being a vampire or werewolf, I might still be a werewolf.
Yeah. Okay. I'm assuming your answer is also vampire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would pick
Cool.
a vampire.
Same. That was, that's one of those questions where we're here
Yeah.
for this. So
We
you
wrote
know.
this.
Yeah. If you had to choose, this is more for the authors. If you have to choose a song to best encapsulate the work that you have featured in Blood, Sweat, and Queers, what would you pick?
A song?
Yeah. Asking a hard-hitting question here. And it's
I'm panicking because I literally have a playlist on my phone that's for the novel version.
Okay.
And now I'm
name 2 or 3 of the songs.
Lord have mercy. Okay, I can't. Please go, Andy. Please go.
Okay, I'm thinking, and this is maybe kind of a cop-out answer a little bit because I really haven't thought about this before. But
I was hoping you hadn't. I wanted this to be like a gut reaction.
I want to say pretty much anything by Hosier,
But
but maybe Take Me to Church or any of the ones. I know there's a lyric in one of his songs where it's clawing out of the dirt or something like that. But I want to say maybe Take Me to Church is what first comes to mind. Yeah. Kind of gritty and yearny for sure.
Okay, I got it because I looked at my playlist. I Am Not a Woman, I'm a God by Halsey.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
I get it.
Hell yeah. All right. So if any of you like those songs, mayhaps you will like these stories. All right. So I guess we'll toss it over to the audience now. If anyone has any questions for any of us.
I don't really have a question, but this is for you, Andy. It's I don't know how interested in video games you are, but Resident Evil 8 Village,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, I'm glad somebody mentioned that.
I mean,
I
sounds
was
like
gonna
you
say
described
something
it.
about it. No, I literally did, and that was a huge inspiration. And it's really interesting depending on what audiences I'm in front of. It's like getting up in front of people and being like, yeah, and Resident Evil Village is a huge inspiration for sure. It absolutely was. So thank you for that. It absolutely was. When I was working through my novel, again, this is a sapphic love story, and the first couple months I was writing, I just became this fiend of consuming anything lesbian on the internet. I was like. And so, of course, in Resident Evil Village, there's a character, Lady Dimitrescu, who is rumored to be a lesbian, and it's truly just an internet.
Come on.
I mean, come on, truly just an internet rumor. But I took that and I was like, queer, reclusive, lesbian,
Daughters.
vampire, daughters. No. So thank you for talking that because it's absolutely an inspiration for this story. Even just the image of her was a huge inspiration. You can see it in my art for Alondra. And I was feeling a little self-conscious about that in the beginning. I was like, some people are gonna read this story and be like, this is totally inspired by us. But my partner was like, yeah, and they're gonna be like, I've been looking for a story inspired by Resident Evil. So don't feel self-conscious about that. And I don't, because really that's what all great literature and media is all inspired by other authors and especially other queer creatives who are putting a rumor out there that this video game character is a lesbian, and then hopefully inspiring authors and creatives to write cool stories about it. Yeah.
Is your character also 9 feet tall?
Oh yeah.
Oh my god.
You can see in the
Say
art.
no more.
Yeah, for sure. Huge part of it. I mean, it kind of vaguely gets into that in the story, but that was huge. I'm like, yeah, I need to write a story about a 9 foot tall gay. Yeah.
Size difference,
Yeah.
kink, anyone?
I know, literally.
Yes.
If you could be any variety, I guess, of vampire, like Twilight vampire, Anne Rice vampire, Dracula vampire? Which type would you want to be?
I mean, if you want to have like the ideal afterlife, it's Twilight vampire because you have no problems.
I was gonna say, like, you could, there's a potential you gain a random superpower, you're indestructible, you never have to sleep, which is my constant concern in life.
You can't just take like a sip of someone's blood, you have to kill the person. So if that's something that you care about.
Or you could eat animals, which is arguably worse.
Just a permanent diet.
Yeah,
Oh, the idea of having immortality on a diet sounds like hell.
it does. Yeah. We get into the morality of what vampires do a different time. That's a different conversation.
I'll say, if I'm not going the Twilight way, if I'm going for what I think would be the most psychologically healthy version of vampirism long term, I would go with The Vampires in a Dowry of Blood by St. Gibson. This is an epistolary retelling of Dracula from the perspective of his brides, and it's all about unpacking trauma, growing to be a better person, and leaving abusive relationships. It's fantastic, and their capacity to grow and actually mature over immortality is very tempting.
Absolutely. All right. Go ahead.
I would choose to be Interview with the Vampire from the show Vampire, but it's because they are so messy and full of drama. You would never get bored. Like, I think that the reason they're like that is because they're gay and because they get bored, so they have to like create drama all the time.
Yes.
So I'm like, I would never get bored. It'd be so fun.
They're like messy and have issues, but they also happen to be vampires.
Right, yeah, like, they're queer first, okay? They just happen to be vampires.
Imagine a queer situationship that takes place over 2,000 years.
I would have to agree with you for the same reason, but that comes first, but also I would say maybe the True Blood vampires for the same reason, and plus because they, even though it's not great, can drink the True Blood, they can drink the synthesized blood, because I think I would kind of have an issue. Like, as much as I totally agree with you that being immortal on a diet would suck, I think I would have an issue with killing people all the time. I couldn't get past it.
All the time.
All the time. Like every once in a while, like as a treat.
As a treat.
But if I could, exist on True Blood like out of the gas station, I'd be pretty sick. So.
I would probably be a Twilight vampire. Listen, it's just there's too much power involved. You can just like photographic memory. Unfortunately, they just are. They're just the ultimate immortal being because Stephanie Meyer wrote a book where her characters had no physical flaws. Unfortunately.
Their physical flaw is that they don't have fangs.
That's true. Yeah, the no fangs, being a vampire with no fangs, pretty sad. Yeah.
What would you do if you had to go to high school again and again and again?
I mean, we're talking about how we want immortal life to be messy. I feel like there's nothing messier than high school.
Also, they don't have to do
They
that.
also don't have to, they choose to do that
They
of
just
their
do
own
that for
free
some
will.
reason.
Also, they choose the most boring way to go back to high school. They go to high school, but they don't interact with anybody. They don't do anything. Excuse me, I'm gonna go back and be a theater kid again and be really messy. Like, what do you mean? Or I'm gonna go back and be on the school newspaper again, and then also be really messy and stay up until 4 a.m. writing a newspaper article that definitely doesn't really matter because it's about the Board of Education meeting. However, now I don't need sleep, so it doesn't matter.
It's the low stakes for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The low stakes drama is what I want. None of this high stakes drama stuff. I'm good. All right, and yes.
I have a question for the editors about your job as an anthologist. And how did you decide what goes in and what doesn't, and to balance different types of stories? So you have this variety, but you also have a coherence. And then how did you order them?
Okay.
I'll start us here. So, Jamie and I thankfully were very good friends before this process. So,
And remained friends.
yes. Important note. So we were able to go into this with kind of joint minds but split responsibilities. As the vampire scholar working on the project, I also wrote the foreword talking about the history of queer vampire literature. My number one priority when I was looking at stories was, is this telling me a vampire story I haven't heard 1,000 times before? I was looking for diversity in storytelling styles, in the way pieces were being written, and in the archetypes they were engaging with. So we've primarily, of course, talked about Andy and May's stories up here. We have a story called Sucker that is a sort of gay, cruising, the power of like dating apps as a hunting tool for a vampire, and the danger of anonymous hookups. We have pieces like Still We Rot, which is sort of about how capitalism is vampirism, and the ways in which the medico-industrial complex is sucking us all dry. I was really looking for different types of stories, while she was more focused on the literal side during the submission process of, are we hitting the word count we need to be hitting? Like the practical things. I was looking from a very
I was looking at, does this person know how to use commas? Because
you'd be surprised.
to be fair, that was not necessarily a disqualifying factor. I can fix commas. There are some things that are more difficult to fix. So that's the thing with an open submissions process is we absolutely loved and appreciated and gained something from each of the pieces we reviewed. I reviewed all of the pieces, whereas Margaret only reviewed the finalists. And so the
finalists was like 30 stories, which we got down to 8.
Yeah. So in doing that, what I was looking at was, even if a story has grammatical problems or if it falls apart somewhere, there's something to be gained from that, right? And so what we were looking at with open submissions is first, what do the writers want the anthology to be? Because we have, as the editors, a picture in our mind of what we wanted this to be going in. But if the stories we receive don't fit that vision, then the vision shifts a little bit. Luckily, overall, we did remain very true to what we wanted to accomplish originally. But for example, when we opened submissions, we were very open to receiving like sexually explicit or like just violent, explicit content. Just, yes, we were open to smut. Most of the submissions were not very smutty. They were quite, tame, given the fact that the title of the book is Blood, Sweat, and Queers. But that's fine, because that kind of signaled to us that what the writers were gaining from the prompt was in this direction. So that's kind of the direction that we leaned in, where the book doesn't shy away from sex. I don't think you can in talking about queerness. However, it also, this is fully something that I would feel comfortable handing to a teenager. I also read so much worse as a teenager. So I think we try to shield teenagers just a little bit too much, because the fan fictions I was reading.
Yeah, so you should have seen what I was writing as a teenager.
Yeah, right. Yeah, same. Exactly. So
both Jamie and I had unmonitored internet access far too young.
No, I got my first phone very, very young. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. Something I'll say to that as well. In my experience in the queer literature space, there can be a hypersexualization that happens, where in order for a queer character to be presented, it is just an extremely sexually charged piece. And I think it's really special to have a piece of genre fiction that you can hand to like a 15-year-old queer kid and say, hey, here's some characters you're probably gonna identify with on some level, and also your parents are not gonna lose their ever-loving mind when they open it.
Yeah.
But I will also say, we are not shying away from it whatsoever. There is a story called Teeth Sharper Than Moonlight that is entirely exploring the world of consensual kink in a non-explicit way. I will not explain to you how that is done, because it's fascinating how it unfolds. But I think we got the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, we really did. And I think that we tried really hard to balance vampire stories and queer stories, because the two are separate and intertwined at the same time. So looking at a lot of, obviously, like not every story in this store is like this. However, looking at a lot of queer media and what becomes very popular, a lot of it is coming out stories. And coming out stories are incredibly important, right? Like that's something we all kind of went through. However, that didn't need to be the focus.
Your
of
life
this
doesn't
story.
end once you're out the door.
Exactly. Like life continues, and also, isn't it nice to imagine a time, place, or world where we don't need to come out, where it's just kind of normal? So what we did aim for, like queer normativity as well. It was a big part of looking at stories. So ultimately, when we were looking through all the submissions we got, it was, what did we want for the anthology? What is it going to end up being? What fits with what is going to be there? And are we representing the spectrum of queerness without our own biases, right? Like I personally am a bisexual woman. Am I just choosing a bunch of bisexual stories? That's not what happened, luckily, but that's something we had to be conscious of, right? It's like not choosing too many of one kind of story just because that's what I'm into. Because you can't just choose stories based on what you personally like. It's creating a artwork that is representative of something larger than just you.
This anthology very intentionally spans the gender, sexuality, race, and class spectrums.
Yeah, no, it is very, very intentional on our part, trying to make sure to hit all of those. Yeah. Yes.
Follow up. So the 22 that you didn't include, did they speak to you in a way for a different type of project? And I know you talked about a series, but did they, have they guided you?
I'll start and say that there were several cuts that broke my heart. There was one FaceTime at like 2 in the morning where I'm like, are you sure we can't do 10?
Yeah, we were very much, when we got down to like the final finalists, it was a bargaining system of like, okay, you can have this story in the anthology if I can have this one. That's what we got to.
That's probably the most tenuous our friendship surviving the process got, to be completely honest. But is there anything you'd like to speak to?
Yes, I guess so. That is a segue into Contrarian Publishing's next charity anthology project is actually a witch anthology, focusing on women's empowerment specifically, and hopefully we get some sapphic stories in there as well. It's not the only thing we're looking at, but I'm looking at it. And so a big part of what we're trying to do with that is we're in these charity anthologies that we're going to continue doing. We are aiming to raise funds for different organizations each time. So this time we will be raising money for the Joyful Heart Foundation and Planned Parenthood.
That's for the coming one. This book is raising for Trevor Project.
This book raises money for the Trevor Project. The next book is going to raise money for those other 2 organizations. And as we keep going, who knows?
And I will say, we reached out to every single author that submitted something to us,
Yes.
and they know they're loved.
Yeah, there were genuinely a few that we cut that I regularly still think about. There's some that Margaret did not see that I still regularly think about. Like there was this one with an older vampire woman where I don't remember exactly the story now because it's been so long since I read it, but I believe the gist of it was there was an older vampire woman and she has a son who was turned into a vampire and he messes up and turns someone else into a vampire, and it was a whole situation. I regularly still think about that story because it was looking at a sweeter side of vampirism, and it was looking at like older queer relationships, which is something that unfortunately we did not hit. Like that would have been something, but when you're only including 8 stories, you have to pick and choose.
And I'll also just say that Halloween comes around every year, and there's only so many archetypes we can hit before we circle back around to the home base.
Yeah. So, we have talked about in the far future, we've talked about doing a potential part 2 to this. But it's gonna be a while before we get back to it.
I'll bully her eventually.
All right. Anyone else?
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes.
We were just curious. We're teenagers of the 80s. I grew up in New Orleans and Riceville. And so we haven't heard anyone mention this, but we're curious because the film that rewrote how I view vampires.
Lost Boys?
No. Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie.
Oh, I love The Hunger.
So just curious, like your opinions on that, because that film for us is like landmark.
I'll take it if you're
Yeah,
okay with
you
it.
take it.
So David Bowie was my queer awakening. David Bowie is who woke me up to the concept of sexuality and gender outside of the norm. I love The Hunger, and I specifically love the fact that it's not necessarily flashy. If you compare it to other vampire stories of the 1980s, like something like Lost Boys, it's very punchy, it's very quick. The Hunger sits in this almost tender place. It's not just grabbing you by the loins, it's grabbing you by the heart, and it's grabbing you by the eyes. No, the big thing that it's grabbing you is by the eyes. If you pause any frame of that film, it's on streaming, I believe it's on Plex right now. I know, I just wrote a thing about vampire movies that are currently streaming. That's the only reason I know that. But if you pause anywhere while streaming that film, you're looking at an impressionist painting, practically. And specifically, the way Catherine is shot in that film. No one has ever been more beautiful. She just is the feeling of wind on your face on that first spring day when it's warm in New York and you just feel your muscles relax. That is what she personifies in this film. And it also has Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus, so it kills.
Also, Margaret saying things like that just casually is one of the reasons I approached her about this anthology.
If you want to read a lot more very poetic descriptions of vampires in history, read the foreword. I got really carried away.
Yeah, she had to rework that and also apparently cut it down. There was a version that I did not see that was longer and more academic, I believe. Yeah.
Someone someday, I'll say this, so I have a master's degree, and my initial master's was going to be on vampires in musical theater, and somewhere around writing 140 pages of a thesis, my advisor was like, hey, so a thesis is 30 pages. So I ended up writing a different topic, but one day I will sit down and properly be like, let's talk about the vampire in American media and how it's everywhere.
All right, anybody
Any
else?
other questions? Okay, I think it's time to get signing.
Yeah, so if you have not yet purchased this book, you can do so at the front there. There are also some lovely art prints.
And some adorable pins of Connie, the Contrarian Publishing's mascot frog, dressed up as a vampire. They're adorable.
Yeah, so you can go up there, purchase a book, purchase a print, and then come over here and get it signed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, just wanted to say thank you so much to both Mae Murray and Andy Astor for being here. Neither of them are from New York. They both traveled to be here. Thank you both. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, also, hang on. Sorry. Before everyone leaves, we would like to take a selfie with the group that is here. Is that all right?
If you want to be in the, if you don't want to be in the selfie, that's also okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna say goodnight to our online audience.
Thank you for being here.